Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's installment of the Zero Hunger Lab Summer Institute. One of Zero Hunger Lab's partners in reaching out to LGUs and expanding its horizons is Galing Pook Foundation. Here to give tonight's opening remarks is Ms. Georgina Hernandez Yang, Executive Director of Galing Pook Foundation.
Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you, Wina, and good evening to all of you. And thank you for the opportunity to open this session and the invitation for Galing Pook Foundation to always be an active and strong partner of Zero Hunger Lab. Galing Pook Foundation works with local government units all over the country, and we've been here for almost 30 years, since 1994. We've been running the Galing Pook Awards, searching for the most innovative, participatory, sustainable, and scalable local government programs. And this year, we're actually also running the Galing Pook Awards entitled Gobyerno, Magagaling na Programa Mula sa Magagaling na Pook. And what I have to share about that, I believe has a lot to do with our topic for this evening on value chains and disasters. Many of the programs that we have searched and recognized in our organization are on this topic of agricultural agro-enterprise value chains, linking small farmer producers, smallholder farmers to markets, and also responding to the food and nutrition needs, food security needs of communities, vulnerable communities, especially in times of natural and man-made disasters. And I think for this evening, as we open, I wanted to share with you the 3S that Galing Pook is advocating for, that hopefully throughout the country, we are able to capacitate the fellows, the Zero Hunger Lab fellows, and also partners in local governments to push for sustainable, safe, smart, and sustainable communities. Safe communities ensures that peace and order, peace and development, as well as access to universal healthcare is ensured. Smart is really on the use of technology. Uh, in our topic today on value chains and disasters, there really is a need to use technology and data in terms of gaining access to market information regarding the prices of different agricultural commodities, as well as using smart technology for building community resiliency, especially in times of disaster. While a lot of government resources still goes to relief and rehabilitation, with the use of smart technology, hopefully eventually we get to use AI and different forms of advanced technology, we will be better prepared and more resilient in terms of disaster resiliency and climate change adaptation, so that there will be less resources needed for response and rehabilitation, and more investments on preparedness and climate change adaptation, as well as building community resiliency. And in terms of sustainability, we have seen in the pandemic the challenges that we experienced in sustaining the supply chain, our food supply chain, especially with the lockdowns, a lot of different difficulties with regard to logistics. And I think many of our speakers this evening will share about that. I'm actually also very happy that our speakers this afternoon, this evening, will be able to dwell on these themes in the context of the what they call the new normal, but what we hope to be a better normal as we make our way through the COVID-19 pandemic. We have learned a lot of lessons, and hopefully we will be better prepared in terms of business continuity, um, sustaining access to nutritious, affordable food supply for constituencies all over the country. And for this evening, may we all find the opportunity to interact and engage with one another. We do have very experienced speakers for tonight, but I hope that everyone also gets a chance to share their experiences, their thoughts, maybe through the chat box. As we think that a lab like this, the Zero Hunger Lab, really relies so much also on the ability of our participants to share their insights, their thoughts, and even in the form of questions. So to close my brief message for tonight, sana lahat tayo would also earn our space here by also contributing our thoughts and our questions as we go along in this session 5 of the Zero Hunger Lab called Value Chains and Disasters. Yun lang po, maraming salamat muli sa Zero Hunger Lab and to all of its partners at magandang gabi.
Thank you, Miss Georgina, for that very warm welcome, and also for sharing about the 3S by GP, that GP is advocating and sharing what GP does for food security for the better normal. So this is an excellent way for us to jump into our program. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Joanna Lao is a Senior Program Manager of Jollibee Group Foundation, or JGF, the social responsibility arm of Jollibee Foods Corporation, which operates the largest food service network in the Philippines. She manages the Farmer Entrepreneurship Program, which aims to help smallholder farmers improve their income by linking them to institutional buyers like JFC. Concurrent with her post in Jollibee, she served as the program director for the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation CEO Summit in 2015, curating a 3-day top-level gathering of CEOs and state leaders in the Asia Pacific. Joanna is a graduate of the Ateneo de Manila University, completing her master's in public management with honors. Let's welcome Ms. Joanna Lao.
Thank you. Thank you to Zero Hunger Lab for this opportunity and this invitation. So I'll be, since we're talking about value chains and disasters, I'll be talking about value chain innovations for food security. So as mentioned, I'm with Jollibee Group Foundation, and I actually joined the foundation in 2009, shortly after Typhoon Ondoy. And I remember at that time, with you saw how it really affected communities, and I was looking to be part of an organization that had a response to that. So I was happy to be able to join the foundation. So let me tell you a little bit more about our organization. Jollibee Group Foundation is actually the social responsibility arm of Jollibee Foods Corporation, or JFC. Of course, many people are quite familiar with Jollibee, but other than that, you might not know that there are also other restaurant brands that are part of the group. And even in the United States, China, the Middle East, and other countries worldwide. So as the foundation of a food company, we focus on helping Filipino families have access to food. And we do that through our various programs. So for the Farmer Entrepreneurship Program, this involves helping smallholder farmers to deliver directly to the Jollibee Group of restaurants. We've also been helping the Department of Education in school feeding through the Busog Lusog Talina school feeding program, where we help to build kitchens for the school feeding kitchens. And we also have a scholarship program, employment-driven scholarships, to help graduates to earn a better livelihood when they graduate. And for in times of disaster, we know in the Philippines, disaster hits quite often. So in response, we have the Jollibee Group Food Aid. So in the context of our session for today, I'll be focusing more on food aid and the Farmer Entrepreneurship Program. So how do we respond during disaster? As I said, since all of our programs focus on access to food, even in disaster, immediate food provision has been our focus. And in the past, the way that we usually do it is what we serve. Of course, there's the ready-to-eat meals that are provided by the restaurants. Those can be served. But also, other than that, our commissary developed a special congee mix that you can just add to rice and water and egg. And this can already be a hot meal that can be served to those who are suffering from disasters. No? So in the past, where we would serve this food would be in evacuation centers. As we know, like for example, in Taal, we serve this kind of food in evacuation centers, in mobile kitchens and community kitchens organized by partners. And we would even organize special school feeding programs to recover after disaster. And this would serve as, the motivation, incentive for the children to come back to school so that they can help to be normalized. But so this is how we normally do the food aid program. So, but what happened in 2020, everyone knows, no, we encountered a different type of disaster, and the usual ways where we used to distribute this food involves congregation of people, and this cannot be done anymore. And yet people are going hungry. In 2020, we found out that 21% of Filipino families experience involuntary hunger. That was double what was experienced in 2019, which was just 9%, and even surpassed the previous record of 19% in 2011 and 2012. So, ano na yung gagawin natin, diba? Maraming nagugutom, but the usual channels of distributing food is not available. So that's why we had to find a way to innovate in the value chain. So for those who really have to go to work, yung walang choice, and these are the frontliners, no, especially the hospital frontliners. Fortunately, some of our restaurants were able to open, and so the ready-to-eat meals were served through the restaurants, and then they were the ones who served in the delivered to the hospitals and other health centers, no. But other than the ready-to-eat meals, our R&D also developed a special product which is ready-to-cook food. So this is low-cost, nutritious, because in times of disaster we really have to feed a lot of people. So this was specially developed for this time. No? And how were we able to distribute this, considering that people cannot congregate? So what is really key, and what really we could only do it with them, is this network of partners. So we have network of NGOs, local institutions, even government institutions, that they were the ones who really went out and distributed these ready-to-cook meals to families in need. So the ready-to-cook food was the chicken. They would cook it with some vegetables, and that's already at least one meal for a family, and they would even extend it to more. Some of our partners also put up community kitchens, so the food could also be delivered there, and they're the ones who distribute it to the families. No, so it was really our partners who went all out to go to even hard to reach areas. So you can see in this picture na part of the is yung sa Coast Guard, part of our partners. So talaga, all out talaga para lang maabot yung mga nagugutom. No? So we're really grateful to our partners to enable that. Another project that we supported during this pandemic, we're supporting to help in providing food assistance, is the Project Carinderia. And this is implemented by our partner, Kasagana Ka Credit and Savings Cooperative. So the focus of this project naman are carinderias in urban poor communities, because the problem is it's hard to reach the communities, whereas yung carinderias, they're already there. And so they can serve as the mechanism to distribute the food. This project was able to help 290 carinderias and 5,800 beneficiaries. And it was really needed because we found out through our partner that before the project, 70% of the carinderias surveyed actually were not earning anymore. or had to close. So nandun sila sa community, they're able to prepare food, sila yung malapit, kaya lang nahirapan sila sa livelihood because people could not buy from them. So during the project, with the help of the project and our project donors, the participating carinderias started earning again. So over 40% of them earned more than 500 pesos a day. And the really good news is that months after their participation in the project, 90% of the carinderias continued to operate. So that was really one of the main objectives, to be able to help them to restore their livelihood. No? So in sum, for 2020, through the food aid program and our various partners and donors, we're able to serve more than 5.5 million meals to families and frontliners, and 230 carinderia owners were trained and were able to assist over 100,000 meals to families in need. So that's what we've been doing for food aid. Next, I'd like to talk about the Farmer Entrepreneurship Program, which began in 2008 when the Board of Trustees of the Jollibee Group Foundation directed us to find ways for the company to buy raw materials directly from smallholder farmers. And so we began to study the situation to see how that could be. And what we discovered was that in a typical agriculture value chain, farmers are on one end producing the products, but it has to go through many, many layers before it reaches the end consumers. So the farmers are able to capture very little of the value and, of course, little of the profit. So that's why the foundation established the Farmer Entrepreneurship Program to help the farmers expand their market options so that they can supply directly to Jollibee, or other restaurants, hotels, supermarkets, and other institutional buyers. So what did we do to enable them to do this now? So to illustrate, we'll talk about the onion value chain as it works now in FEP. So here you can see the basic elements of the value chain. So the production, consolidation, marketing, and consumption, and the actors, the farmers, the co-op, the various markets, and the end consumers. And there are different types of strategies, different value chain upgrading strategies, so that to help the farmers improve their participation in the value chain. And I'll be taking you through what we used now. So the first strategy that we applied was to improve the institutional environment by forming a network of support institutions such as local partners, national and regional government units, and financing institutions. Each of these institutions play different roles in supporting the farmers. So the supporting environment is there, no? The next upgrading strategy was to improve the horizontal coordination by organizing the farmers into clusters to consolidate their products for better volume and competitive supply. So the farmers also improve their product by sorting them according to quality and size and peeling the onions for certain markets. It's important to respond to the preference of each buyer. Here in these pictures, you can see that the farmers devised ways to quickly sort small, medium, and large onions, since Jollibee has a minimum size requirement. And members of the community, such as women and the elderly, also earn extra income because they are the ones who do the peeling of the onions before delivery. So the next upgrading strategy is to add the function of sales and marketing. Whereas before, if the farmers were used na pinipick up lang sa farm nila yung produce but for a very low price, now with their training and their consolidated volume, the farmers are equipped to negotiate with markets and to deliver their products directly, for which they can get a higher selling price. And Jollibee Group oriented the farmers on the specifications needed, including the specifications for delivery, such as type of vehicle, packaging, delivery time, etc. So these are things that the farmer group handles now. No? And finally, to ensure customer satisfaction, the farmers continually improve their processes, which is another way of value chain upgrading. So for example, Jollibee requires that all agricultural suppliers should be certified in Philippine Good Agriculture Practices, or PhilGAP. So with the help of the Department of Agriculture, the foundation, and other partners, the farmers were proudly able to attain their PhilGAP certification. So using this value chain approach, 17 farmer groups have been able to deliver over 7,000 metric tons of assorted vegetables to Jollibee Group since 2009. I'd like to share with you particularly the story of Kuya Greg Quintela from Alcala, Pangasinan. So we all know that a lot of farmers had a hard time during COVID, and Greg did as well. But because he was already part of the value chain, he still had markets. He was still able to deliver with the help of the foundation. He was able to put his onions in cold storage. And when the lockdown eased up, he was still able to deliver these onions to Jollibee. So, and what's good is that Greg and his fellow farmers even helped with the distribution of the food aid, food relief to the communities in their area na nangangailangan. So, hindi lang siya ngayon yung tinutulungan, tumutulong na siya sa iba. Kasama na siya sa mga tumutulong sa iba. And their group even donated rice through DA to communities affected by the typhoons. So this is really a story that we want to see for more farmers now once they've become really part of the value chain. So to close, I'd like to share some insights that we've learned over the years in terms of innovations in the value chain. No? And the first is that they can be built from incremental changes. Pagka sinasabi kasi natin innovation, minsan inisip natin kailangan parang it's quite new or parang something very different. But innovations can also take the form of small changes. And sometimes these are more doable and easier to implement. And when this small change is built, it really comes out to a bigger impact. No? But in order to do that, what's important is to study and understand the existing system to see how it can be adapted, because it's hard to institute change unless you know the system that you're working in. So for example, the system that the farmers are part of, and the system of food distribution during disasters. No? And especially in our case, we're only able to do any of these innovations through the collaboration with our partners. And these are sorely needed in order to make the value chains include and serve communities. So that's it for our experience. Thank you for letting us share our experience. And if you have any questions, please feel free to go to our website or to contact us at this email address. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Joanna, for a very informative presentation. It was great seeing the different ways in which foundations don't just respond to crisis, but actively equip those in agricultural communities to be able to face food security disasters on their own. I remember visiting Jollibee Kitchen in Tarlac, and also I was able to witness some of the farmers in Kapangan, Benguet when they were sorting bell peppers for Jollibee to deliver to Jollibee. Anyway, so I'd like to remind our audience to leave any questions you might have in the chat so that our team can get ready for our guided discussion later on in this session. So I'm seeing a lot that we have a big audience now. Thank you very much for attending. I'm seeing from the chat, there are some people from Tandag City, Antique, Davao del Norte. So we have audience from Luzon to Mindanao. So welcome again. Okay, so now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Jay Carrizo, the co-founder of Solistrat Incorporated and a member of Galing Pook Foundation. Mr. Jay Carrizo is a local governance specialist and political economy expert with more than 2 decades of experience in development work and research. He has worked with various public and private organizations, including international financing institutions. Mr. Carrizo is the co-founder of Solistrat Incorporated, a management and research consulting firm, and currently heads the Galing Pook UNICEF project on children and youth participation in governance. Mr. J, the virtual stage is yours.
Thank you, Emma. Let me share my screen. Yeah, good evening, everyone. So in the next 15 minutes, I will be sharing with you the trends and some lessons from one of my studies on food supply chain, particularly on rice commodity in Mindanao during the COVID-19 pandemic. So the presentation will revolve on four parts. The first two will provide a background on the Mindanao Food Highway and the study on the rice commodity. The third will be a discussion on the trends on the supply chain of rice commodity under the COVID-19 pandemic, while the last part will be about the lessons based on the results of the study. So what is the Mindanao Food Highway? When the enhanced community quarantine was implemented in the first quarter of 2020, development-oriented individuals and organizations, including the Zero Hunger Lab and Civica Asian Development Academy, gathered together and started to collaborate to understand the effect of the pandemic to the food supply chain. This led to the organization of the Mindanao Food Highway, which aims to gather and analyze data and information on value food chains and understand the disruptions that occur uh, uh, understand the disruptions that occur. So it was organized in 2020 and hopes to produce policy and action-oriented recommendations for decision making, not only at the local but also at the national level. So to realize the objective, the Mindanao Food Highway started with the rice commodity. It was a rapid survey, and the focus was rice because it's a staple food of the Filipinos. The study was initially done in regions 9 to 13 last May 2020, but was eventually expanded to include the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao. So the value chain, the study looked into the value chain from producers to consumers. So as you can see, uh, almost half of the respondents are consumers, followed by farmers, and we also included vendors, the millers being also an important part or stakeholder in the value chain, and consolidators, LGUs or local government units, and the NFA or the National Food Authority. So what are the emerging trends? So the first is that the COVID-19 pandemic redefined the roles of some stakeholders. As you will see in the next slide, an increasing number of producers would directly connect with the consumers, bypassing middlemen. And also, LGUs became the major disruptor in the rice supply chain. So in this slide, you will see the uh, value chain for the rice, the supply chain for the rice, starting from inputs uh, to consumption. So the black lines are the original are the original uh, links, but are not anymore included in the study. So the focus of the study is more on the greens and the green lines and dashes, as well as the red ones. So the green dashes correspond to palay, the supply chain for palay, while the green lines correspond to the supply chain for milled rice. The red lines represent the observed flow of milled rice. So as you can see, there are already red lines starting from production down to the consumption, wherein producers would sell directly to household consumers because of the problems that will be presented later. Also, as you will see, the LGUs became a buyer and source the rice from wholesalers and retailers. So that's the new and observed flow of milled rice under the pandemic. Second, the volume of rice produced did not change and supply is said to be sufficient. That is according to the Department of Agriculture. However, the pandemic created a false sense of insufficient supply. Why? First, LGUs went into a buying spree of rice commodity because they were using rice as part of the food supply that they are distributing, or the food packs that they are distributing to their constituents. Second, lockdowns led to the closure of some stores. So because of that, even though people have money, they cannot buy rice because some stores are closed. And there are also transportation issues. These are from the producers, from the farmers to the millers, and from the producers to wholesalers or to consumers. And the movement of supply to areas with high demand also occurred. This means that in areas like, for example, in Region 10, which is a producing region, instead of supplying their rice to areas like Misamis Oriental, other parts of Misamis, they supply directly to Davao City because Davao is a big buyer for rice. Third, almost areas, including BARM, reported an increase of demand for rice by about 50%. So local government units and charitable organizations use the rice or include the rice for their food pack distribution. And because of the news that some stores are closed and it's difficult to transport rice, consumers went into panic buying. So of course that led to the increase also of the price of rice per kilo. For farm, supply was cut from Malaysia and Indonesia, where they got their major sources of supply. Actually, in Tawi-Tawi, which is very close to Malaysia, uh, they are complaining that with the lockdowns, not only in the Philippines but also in the neighboring countries, they cannot anymore buy rice, which is very cheap compared to the rice being supplied from Mindanao, especially from Zamboanga City. Next, the increase of demand triggered increase in prices. So according to wholesalers, the price of rice per kilo increased from 2 pesos to 10 pesos. While for consumers, they claim that the price of rice per kilo increased from 3 pesos to 20 pesos. So in the right side of your screen, you will see the blue and green bars. The blue represent the price of rice per kilo before COVID, while the orange one represent the price of rice during COVID. So if you will see, the highest increase was noted in Caraga, where the price of rice increased from 35 pesos to 55 pesos. In Northern Mindanao, the price of rice is just the same before and during COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic also led to a new consumer behavior. First, consumers started buying per sack. Before, they were only buying per kilo uh, because they are confident that the next day they can still go to a store and buy another kilo of rice. But with the pandemic, the closure of the stores, and the difficulty in transportation and mobility, consumers started buying per sack. And 26% reported change in consumption behavior. Half of these, or 13%, increased consumption by half kilo of rice to 1 kilo of rice per day, while the other half, or 13%, claimed that their consumption decreased by around half a kilo of rice per day. So here, on the right side again, you will see the household size and the kilos of rice consumed per day. So uh, before the pandemic, generally before the pandemic and during the pandemic, it should be assumed that there is a change, and indeed there was a change because during the pandemic, for houses with for small households, that is houses with 1 to 4 members, only those houses with 2 members showed an increase, while in the latter part, or in houses where there are bigger number of members, it was shown that there is a decrease, particularly houses with 9 members and houses with 10 members. So there's a decrease of consumption of rice in bigger households. Also, there's a continuing challenge. I mean, continuing challenges that are being experienced by the farmers, which in turn affects us as consumers. So among these are the lack of insufficient farm inputs. That includes fertilizers, even seeds, and also support, lack of government support to the farmers, particularly for post harvest facilities. During the pandemic, new challenges occurred, and these include transportation and mobility, and also closed agricultural supply stores, especially during ECQ and MECQ. So, for lessons, first, disaster events and pandemics alter food supply chains. And this alteration create new roles for different players and stakeholders. So, as we have seen earlier, the LGUs became uh, a massive buyer of rice, and some producers also directly contact consumers and sell their produce. And the applications or platforms, shopping platforms like Lazada, Shopee, and even Facebook groups were used by the producers to directly communicate and interact with their consumers. Second, LGUs play a crucial role. Unfortunately, LGUs need to understand when they are becoming facilitative, that is, normalizing economic activities, or when they are becoming disruptive, in a sense that they already compete with other players or actors by procuring in volume when they can distribute either cash or food stubs. So when they buy in volume, large volumes, the tendency is to create changes in the prices of rice. So that's basic law of supply and demand. And third, people can adapt. So this must be channeled to positive behavioral change. For example, lesser dependency on rice. As we have seen, bigger families or bigger households tend to consume less during the pandemic. And also, in areas like Barm, it was noted that uh, people started shifting to alternative sources of carbohydrates. So they use saging or root crops like kamote and kamoteng kahoy. Next, emergency protocols and mechanisms to address shocks in the food supply chain during disaster events or during pandemics should always be in place, from the different levels of government to communities and down to household or family level. So this should be part of the disaster preparedness. Dati kasi disaster preparedness is focused mainly on how to evacuate, which is still happening in most LGUs, particularly barangays in the provinces and rural municipalities. Lastly, developing local food security through sustainable sources is key. So, because most of the cities do not have rice farms, they tend to import from neighboring municipalities, from neighboring provinces. And in the case of BARM, they import from Malaysia and Indonesia. Unfortunately, because of lockdowns, they cannot anymore secure a stable supply. So here, one lesson is that there should be a sustainable sources, and that could include planting rice, at least in the community or in the municipality, so that importation will be minimized. So that's it. Thank you very much. And again, good evening.
Thank you, Sir Jay, for that very in-depth presentation about the food supply chains in the Mindanao Food Highway. So this makes us understand how consumer behavior changes in disasters, and that also will make us understand that mitigating disasters is not just physical effect of the disaster, but also on food security. Okay, now our next speaker is Mr. Harold Lu. He is a researcher and an entrepreneur with experience in rural development, agricultural development, sustainable rural development, food security, and social development. Um, Having spent several years as part of the corporate world, he has shifted into agribusiness, having to manage a family farm. As a result of that exposure, he is working as a consultant for agri-based startups as well as producer cooperatives and associations trying to change centuries-old practices in the food industry. So let's hear what Mr. Harold Lu can share to us tonight. Welcome, Sir Harold.
Thank you for that welcome, Emma. That was quite a mouthful. um, so here's my presentation. No, first and foremost, I'd like to thank Wina, Elmer for inviting me here, and for Jay and Joey for their presentations. Um, Mine is going to take a different tack in the sense that it's more of an overview or a summary of what they've discussed in order to prepare us for a more in-depth and animated discussion later on for our Q&A. Um, so without further ado, I'll just tackle on the overview of the agri supply chain. I believe Joey has already mentioned specific actions that Jollibee Group has undertaken, and as well as Jay in his study. So I'm just going to take a few tidbits from that and present them. So in summary, no, no. It's what I want to present is the challenges that exist from farm to fork, especially in a pressured situation such as disasters or the ongoing pandemic. This agro supply chain has existed even prior to the pandemic. So we have here from the inputs that farmers do need and the production that they will undertake. The processing and distribution happens through different intermediaries which land on our plates, whether it's through restaurants or through the groceries that we do buy. Albeit, this is a very simplified supply chain that I'm presenting. Especially with an archipelago such as us, there are a lot of nuances that we do have to take into consideration when we talk about the entire supply chain. Now, with regards to what happens during the supply chain is that prices are not normally reflective of the costs borne by the producers. I believe Joey has already mentioned this, that there are a lot of incongruencies with how things are priced because the traditional way of doing so or the existing system that we do have, um, the viajeros, as we call them, would visit particular farms for their produce. And at a certain point, these viajeros control the access to these markets as well as the prices that they would get from them. In fact, there is a study that has been made that there is a disconnect between the actual prices that we do pay here in urban centers versus what is paid to the farmers at the farm gate level. Uh, and in most cases, the reason why they are locked in a cycle of poverty is because the farmers or our producers do not get enough of a return for their investments in a particular cycle. Secondly, they don't have the information with regards to the production or quality. Some of the production methods that we do have are antiquated, and these are methods by which they've only gotten used to, and there's no other way for them to improve on their production processes, as well as the lack of available information from about the quality that's demanded by the market. Just a case in point, uh, 2 years ago, prior to the pandemic, we were helping rice farmers from Nueva Ecija, from Tarlac, and from Pangasinan. And one of the most distinct conversations I had with the producers then, when we brought them to the markets here in Manila, was that um, one, they did not know that there was a market for unhusked rice, or what we call brown rice, here in Manila. For them, this was only used to feed their livestock, when in reality this provides a higher price in the market. Sorry. um, as well as the type of quality that's demanded by the market here, wherein um, they prefer whole grains rather than the ones that are broken, that many of the farmers just sell to a lot of the middlemen. So not many of that information gets back to the producers. Thirdly, this is common knowledge. There's a lack of proper processes and infrastructure. And when we talk about infrastructure, it's not just the farm to market roads, but also the um, post-harvest infrastructure that is needed, drying facilities in cases of rice, even for vegetables, the proper handling facilities, even storage for that matter. And that relates to the transport costs that we have. And we're not just talking about the financial cost, but also the cost in terms of losses. I'm sure all of us have seen the types of transportation that's normally used in bringing our food for those here in Manila to here to Manila from Calabarzon or from Region 1 or from Northern Luzon. It's usually a hodgepodge of jeepneys, open bed trucks, or even wing vans, which in reality adds to the additional losses incurred. So traders and retailers would try to recover those losses in terms of the costs. Uh, just to give you an idea, the Philippines is actually one of the highest, if not the highest, in the ASEAN in terms of food prices. And that's funny because um, when we go to Singapore, for example, we realize it's very expensive, but our raw materials here is as expensive or more expensive than Singapore. When we go to, for example, Vietnam or Thailand, they can sell rice at less than half the price that we sell it here. So just that's to give you an idea about that. And storage, long-term and short-term storage is a problem. This is something that has been addressed for the last 6 to 10 years in varying uh, with varying results. No, this is where we are now focusing in terms of how to store properly the harvest of our farmers and our other producers, because from these losses alone, this is where they could make their money. Now, in a situation where time and quantity are of the essence, these problems get exacerbated in one way or another. So in the pressure cooker situation of a disaster, you're trying to map out where to source particular items, how to get it to where it's needed, and at the lowest possible cost. This is a concern for everyone, where we actually try to demand the lowest price possible, not knowing how disjointed the prices can be from the farmers. For example, uh, late last year we were trying to help calabasa farmers or squash farmers here in Luzon, where the intermediaries would try to buy it at what, 5 pesos or 7 pesos per piece, whereas one piece would weigh around 3 to 4 kilograms. So luging-lugi kung tutuusin. Um, the problem there is, we try to come in with a solution where we buy it. Oh, sige, let's buy it for 5 to 7 pesos per kilo, which the farmer will, of course, enjoy. No? It's much more for their efforts, not realizing that the actual cost of production is somewhere around 8 pesos per kilo. So these are the details and the items that we have yet to be aware of, and we have to know in order for us to know what the actual fair price is. And the higher losses are incurred in all parts of the supply chain. Kumbaga sa Tagalog, lahat nagmamadali, di ba? You want to get it to one place uh, at an accelerated pace, which adds on to the pressure of supply. So you get incongruent quality. Sometimes it's overripe, sometimes it's very raw, and not everything can be used. And when it's going to be transported, it suffers from the excess ng pagkabugbog, or sometimes it gets spoiled by the time it reaches its end user. And obviously, the fragility in this whole system is exposed more so. So if you remember, even as late last year, no, nung in the spate of 3 or 4 typhoons na magkasunod, it exposed a lot of these problems that we already have. The lack of transportation was one, especially since it hit major agri-producing regions from the tip of Luzon in Cagayan to down in Bicol. The entire eastern seaboard, as it were, was affected, and this contributed to the higher prices that we had to deal with last year. Um, and it also highlights the fact that we are a very vulnerable nation. We don't have much redundancy, and as you pointed out, even in Mindanao, we have these situations where we do lack the supply, which is ironic since we do get a lot of the supply for Luzon from Mindanao, and vice versa. So the challenges that we have moving forward, especially as an industry, and some food for thought for our Q&A, is that we do need investments in training, education, as well as infrastructure, which will span several decades. This is something that's sometimes lost in the conversation. I think Joey mentioned it very clearly: when innovation happens in increments, and that happens especially here in the agriculture industry. You can't get the farmer to go for um, more advanced ways of producing, or even how to connect to the market, if you're not able to attend to their immediate needs. um, they have a different way of thinking about things, which is born out of their own experience, compared to people like myself, who come from, let's say, the urban areas, and who have a different way of thinking. So that in itself takes time, um, and getting them to a level where they are able to compete in an open market takes at least 2 or 3 cycles at the fastest. No? Um, and for the rest of the supply chain, especially for us as consumers, we do need to be aware of the actual and true cost of the food that is being produced for us. Uh, it has come to a point where we are expecting high-end vegetables or high-end produce for the price that you would get for, let's say, a reject overseas or something, like to that extent. Um, the analogy that I always give is that we expect a Mercedes Benz for a price of a Toyota. Um, and we always hear about people being more caring about the producers that we have. But if we really do care, then we have to be able to accept that paying a higher price for their produce is the fair way to go about things. Of course, this also has to recognize na um, retail and commercial applications do exist in a different function, but at the end of the day, what is fair is for us to be able to connect directly, pay fairly, and be cognizant of how we really produce our food. And with that, I pass it back to Emma rather, for our Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Harold, for your presentation. Okay, so thank you for sharing on the importance of training and education to farmers and those involved in food security, and also in investing in proper infrastructure for that one. So I myself, because I am from Benguet, I have witnessed those situations also in my place. Okay, so I think this will definitely be a great kicking off point for tonight's guided discussions. There were some questions by the audience which were posted in the chat room, and then I would also like to encourage others to raise their hands if they have questions, if they want to ask their questions personally, then please raise your hands and we will be giving the mic to you. Okay, so we'll be jumping in and discussing this with our panelists. So are our panelists ready for the questions we'll be throwing them? There. Okay, so we have one here. One question, if it was not yet answered, or maybe we can give a more concrete answer to in how to ensure continuous food supply and support for disaster victims and avoid food or aid wastage, because I know we experience this also. So how do we also ensure that the food reach the victims? This is from Miss Kim. So anybody from the panelists can answer.
Siguro I can start with two things, no? So from our experience, one way is that you don't start when the disaster strikes. Parang if this is something that you want to work in and that you're involved in, the best time to start is really beforehand, diba? Like the bulk of the ano is in preparation. So like for example, for the congee mix that that I discussed, that's part of our program, we distribute that to the partners months before. And yung alam na natin na certain months magkakaroon ng typhoon. So even months before, they have access already to those kinds of food. So yun yung ano, that's one thing that can help na it's not disrupted because beforehand you planned for it already. And in terms of traceability, that's why for us it's very important to work with local partners. Kasi talagang nakakausap namin sila mismo and they give us access to the communities that they distribute to. So dapat kilala talaga who you entrust to distribute the aid that you give. That's from us.
Okay. Yes, I agree with that also. So it's in the key, the preparation is the key. Okay, so I have another question. This is for Sir Jay. So you mentioned that LGUs need to know when they're becoming facilitative and when they're becoming disruptive. So can you help us deepen our understanding of this by giving an example of when the lines between facilitative behavior and disruptive behavior from LGUs become blurred?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, it's the local government units that define the environment at the area, right? The communities, municipalities, and even cities. So at times, when they implement programs, uh, like for example, during emergencies, they distribute food. They distribute food packs. Unfortunately, when they enter into a massive buying spree, like for instance in the study that we've shown, they tried to buy and buy rice to the point that the consumers who have money, who can afford to buy rice, cannot look for rice anymore because the LGUs already got them. The tendency is that the demand will increase, particularly for those who have money, and the price will also increase. But then there are cases, for example, in Rosin Sorsogon, where they distribute food stubs, meaning the LGU will give you a piece of paper containing the amount which you can use in buying food products. For example, they also allow the use of food stubs in the public market. So instead of killing the producer, I mean the middleman, the sellers, the wholesalers, and the retailers, instead of the LGU killing them, the LGU is encouraging them because the supply chain continues. The people can buy, and the money is going around. Although in the form of initially in the form of food stubs with monetary values. So that is when the LGU becomes facilitative, while it becomes disruptive when you change or when the LGU alters the environment by yeah, like that one, buying entering into a buying spree for a particular commodity.
Thank you, Sir Jay, for that one, for giving an example. Okay, so there's another question. Um, oh, wait, Sir Harold wants to add more. So please take the stage,
Yeah.
Sir Harold.
Yes, thanks. I think with going back to the earlier question, and I'll try to link it with what Jay said. For example, in terms of the disaster, how to reduce it, you also start with yung just to provide an example, a very specific example, no. Um, yung dito sa pag-angkat for example nung mga um manok, 'di ba? For those that are affected by let's say a typhoon. Um or hindi, sige. Sa rice since Sir Jay mentioned sa rice, 'di ba? Um there is also a need for a change in mentality as well. This is a LGU na once they anticipate something, they already know where the sources are and how their supply chain will be affected, how their existing suppliers, let's say sa palengke, let's say it's a barangay in a rural area in Batangas, for example. Alam na nila where the suppliers in the barangay get their supplies so that they can trace how vulnerable they are. The point that I think Sergey is trying to make is that you try to encourage what the existing system already is and try to change that incrementally so that it will be supportive of the local community. If the LGU becomes a competitor to the supply chain, then you compete against your own citizens, which is something that becomes detrimental to the overall system. And the with the change in mindset and the change in yung pag-insure for example and you avoid waste, you can only minimize that to a certain extent. You cannot avoid it entirely. um that's something that we all have to work on because when a disaster strikes, we are all dependent on whatever infrastructure, whatever systems that we do have So kung anong truck meron nandyan, kung anong ano to distribute and deliver. In terms of yung pag-distribute sa aid, unfortunately, there are a lot of people who will try to skim off or you especially in the last year, 'di ba? Yung mga na-expose na ginagamit lang yung situation for their own purposes. So you will have to develop that trust yourself and question how it goes, how it will go to the victims, to which victims. As a donor, you also have to question yung pagbibigyan mo, paano, saan. And I think in asking those questions, you demand accountability from those who are going to do that work. Hindi naman masama magtanong actually. Mas maganda pa yun to keep everyone on their toes as well.
Okay. Sir Harold, thank you for that. Another example. Since we're already talking about the LGU, there's one question here that asks about if it is possible that the LGU should have their own storage facility for the people, for the constituents. And also, how can they enhance good governance in value chain management in consideration not only during natural disasters, but of the places where sporadic fighting occurs? Okay, so those are questions from our audience.
Siguro sagutin ko na, no? So, first, governance is the balancing of interests. So, our elected officials balance their political interest and also try to look into the interests of the people, the welfare of the people. When an elected official uh, focuses more on his re-election, that is the time when uh, the real the, the real when the elected official focuses more on his re-election, that is the time when there is an imbalance, meaning political interests usually, particularly the search for re-election or the vying for re-election becomes personal. So hindi na siya public interest, mas nagiging yung political mo mas nagiging personal. In that way, hindi na nakikita yung lens na ginagamit ng official na yan becomes limited. So kahit pa magtayo siya ng storage facility, which is not prohibited by the local government code, kahit pa sabihin natin 100 storage facility with that can accommodate large volumes of food, pero na-alter naman yung local economy. That means you are killing the middlemen, you're killing the wholesalers, you're killing the retailers. Ang tendency niyan, happy nga si politician, he can get votes, he becomes popular, but in the end, the economy dies. So, yun ang kailangang balansehin. So, with the question na kung pwedeng magmay-ari, yes. But again, you should balance that with the real situation and how to enhance good governance. Baka kailangan i-balance yung political interest vis-a-vis yung public welfare. So yun lang.
Okay, so there. So it's all about the dynamics in the LGU and the leadership factor. Okay, now, can I call for Miss YY Cruz to read her question to our panelists? Are you still there, Ma'am YY Cruz? I think I should just read the question, baka hindi maayos ang connect.
Sorry.
There she's there. Okay, ma'am, please read your question to our panelists.
Okay. Paano ba to? Hindi ko maibaba. Okay. This pandemic, almost everyone is into urban gardening and into farming, trying to produce their own vegetables, and some LGUs are into community gardening. So why is it that the prices of agri products are so high? This is really so hard for those who cannot have their own vegetable garden. Although I had already watched the webinar, and I saw the chain, no, the agri supply chain. But then for those who are really poor and really could not have their own garden dahil most of them are squatters, how are you going to help them? For example, yung potato, one piece potato is already 10 pesos. Napakamahal talaga. So, kung walang pera, talagang magugutom. So, paano kayo makakatulong dun sa talagang mahihirap if you are working for hunger, zero hunger, kung ang inyong kung ang inyong advocacy ay zero hunger.
Thank you, Ma'am Liwayway. So anybody from the panelists can answer.
Yeah, I think Sir Harold will be the best person to address that. But basing lang doon sa rice commodity that I study, marami kasing factors, ma'am. If we consider, kahit i-apply natin sa vegetables or sa root crops, there are a number of factors that can affect the price of a commodity. That could be transportation. So while the news is and the social media is beefing with pictures of kamatis going rotten, but still yung price sa market ay very high. So that means yung transportation ay hindi working. So the product just stays at the producer's compound or sa farm. Nasisira na lang siya. So dahil hindi siya nakakarating sa market, and with the increase of demand, say for kamatis, mataas yung demand for kamatis, dahil marami naghahanap ng kamatis, ang tendency ng seller, kung meron siyang konti, mag-i-increase siya ng price. So yan, ganun lang kasimple yung ano doon. And how can the government and how can everybody help? Maganda yung gardening, yung vegetable gardening. Actually, that is also one of our, when I was with the National Anti-Poverty Commission, that is one of the programs that we were advocating, especially during disasters and in post-disaster, of course, we plant vegetables in preparation for the succeeding disaster. So, pwedeng ikabit na rin yan later doon sa, sa question na nauna, where kung pwede daw na mag-procure or mag-establish ng storage facilities. So, the program with NAPSI was about parang multi-level marketing, wherein one person, for example, pupunta sa community bank ng seeds, community seed bank. So, hihiram siya ng 5 buto ng ampalaya, and then plant those seeds. Pag nabuhay, that person will need to repay the community seed bank with 25 seeds. So ganun kasimple. So if the government will work thinking yung parang yung Grameen type or parang yung multi-level marketing type, we will think that way, mas marami ang magtatanim, mas marami ang ma-encourage magtanim kahit sa maliit na lupa. Unfortunately, yun nga, yung nasabi ko kanina, the elected officials have different agenda or different interests. So going back to rice, kahit sinasabi natin na the Mindanao is a food basket, may tanim na na palay, but still nag-i-import pa rin yung mga taga Mindanao, lalo na sa Malaysia, sa Indonesia, kasi mababa yung price doon. And doon kulang naman yung support. Again, connecting to your question, ma'am, kulang yung support ng government dito. In a sense na instead of providing subsidies to our farmers, mas ini-encourage ng government to import. Na dahil nag import na tayo, mas mura yung galing sa ibang bansa, ang tendency ng mga existing farmers lilipat sa ibang commodity. Or worse, hihinto na lang sa pagtatanim. In one of the respondents in our Mindanao Food Highway study claimed na huling ano na daw niya yon, huling pagtatanim na ng rice because he is shifting to bananas which provides more income. So tingin niya mas malaki yung income kasi mas yung support ng gobyerno for banana export is there but not complete yung support for rice production. So yun, maraming factors ma'am, and yun lang po ang masabi ko at this point.
Yeah, just to add din sa sinabi ni Sir Zay, no. At the end of the day, it's also balancing whose interests. We're talking about an end consumer and the producer on the one hand. These are two opposite poles of the same extreme. Do you provide a lower cost of food for the consumer para mabili nila at the behest of the producer who will have to sell it? Baka hindi na nga dirt cheap, baka halos pamigay na yung presyo nun, or if there is a price at all. And this is something that has been plaguing everyone. Hindi lang naman to just yesterday, just today, just last week or the last year, but this has been, I think, a multi-generational problem, na multi-decade problem that we've gotten, we've improved on over the years, but it's not enough. Obviously, it's not enough. Sir Jay touched on one aspect, no, which was the transportation part, and as well as the lack of cohesive policy. I think is one thing that that we were dwelling on in terms of the political aspect, or at least government for that matter. Because of a lot of these factors and a whole lot of others, we produce very expensively. That's a fact. We produce very expensively. So much so that it's much better for us literally to import everything rather than produce it locally. But of course, we cannot do that, no. Hindi naman pwedeng hindi. Tayo rin ang mawawalan doon. Ngayon, would it be fair? I think kung halimbawa we subsidize those who cannot afford the food, or who can or those who produce, that's something that I don't think is sustainable in the long run. We've tried that so many times during the before I was born, and even after I was born, and it hasn't changed a thing. Siguro in a similar train of thought nung kay Sir Jay, I am more in the belief that if we improve our processes, if we improve the production, it can be cheaper, it can be better, it can be more nutritious, and everyone can afford it. But at what point do we reach that? Inspiring yung sa ginawa nila John, with the Jollibee Group, which is one of the few in the country who have gone that far. But sa laki na ng Jollibee, hindi pa rin siya sapat. And they can only help so much. Kasi for example, I believe the chicken producers in San Jose was mentioned, and they can provide for more than half of the franchises ng Jollibee. So we can produce a lot, pero at what cost? and kaya ba siyang suportahan. Kasi on the other hand, you have an buying naman, sa buying side, you have an urban poor na iba naman ang set of problems nila why they cannot afford it. So, it's a chicken or egg problem. I don't think we will have the answers on a silver platter, because if we did, we wouldn't be talking about it. And on our end, no, the competition is no longer with our neighbors. It's within the Philippines. We have to realize that as part of the ASEAN, free trade na yung area. So, we cannot afford to be protectionist. Hindi tayo pwede sabihin, bawal yung sa Vietnam or bawal yung sa Thailand. No. There are other people who will be affected by it. Now, yung competition from within, we have to realize din yung prices, yung tinatawag sa English na arbitrage. Alam niyo po ba, for example, na ang bilihin sa Benguet, for example, ngayon, ang nakakagawa lang nun is from uplands from Quezon. Pero yung price difference nila, malaki. And yet, these two areas supply, I'd say, anywhere from 60 to 80% of Luzon for their upland vegetables. So when we talk about upland, that's what? Cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, and all these. So kapag may nangyari sa isa sa kanila, automatic tataas yung prices, ang daming domino effect, to the point that we deprive ourselves of that. So if there is a plan for that on a national level or even at a local government level of how they will serve their producers to temper prices for the end consumers, then we're all for it. It just depends on the plan. So to use the storage facility as an example, I know of a couple of LGUs in the north na daming storage facilities pero hindi nagagamit. At the same time, you have one in Batangas. I just forgot the exact municipality, no? But they have a plan. Paano gagamitin? Okay, magtatayo tayo ng storage facility. Anong purpose niyan? Ano yung and it works. It helps their farmers. It helps the immediate community that serves. I forgot sa Lipa ang nasa-serve niyang major metropolis, pero it's outside of Lipa. So, natutulungan niya lahat na i-temper ang prices, magkaroon ng stable supply, magkaroon ng safety net para sa producers and all that. So, yun din, accountability and looking for these kinds of long-term plans from our elected officials and even from our national officials, civil servants. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sir Harold. So, there are some questions on the chat box that we were not able to read already, but I hope they were also answered from the previous discussions. And also, please join us on our next session after this one. Maybe your answers can also be answered by the next speakers. So I would like to thank Ma'am Joanne, Sir Jay, and Sir Harold for your time tonight. That's a lot of learning from you, and also thank you for the audience for being here. We have quite a big audience, and please join our next session. So our team will be posting the link for the evaluation. Miss Wina will be there. It's already posted. And then also the other questions will be collated and then will also be given to our panelists. And then we are going to email the answers if there are some that we were not able to answer. Thank you so much. Please visit our Facebook page also. It's Zero Hunger Lab. And then also for people who want to set up Zero Hunger Lab sessions, you can also message us. Thank you very much and have a good night. See you later also, those who can join.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.